Hello, it's Demi Davidson here with Thoughtful Dots. Welcome back to another beginner tutorial. Today we are going to be painting this 3-inch rock. I get my rocks from my dad's Etsy shop. It's called The Rock Shop Co. All products, tools, everything will be linked in the description of this video. So if you are interested in getting some rocks, go check out my dad's shop. They come in a white color, but I painted this one black using Folk Art multi-surface satin in pure black. And I will be using my Happy Dotting Company dotting rods and my Thoughtful Dots brand stylus tools with the millimeter size on the handle. So I'll be letting you know what size to use. And I'll be using this stencil from Happy Dotting Company to do our guide marks. So again, everything is linked in the description of this video. These rocks are really great because they have the center marked, but it's raised a little bit. So I typically like to, let me try my fingernail, or I like to get a tool and just chip it off. Just so that when we go to do our center dot, it's not a raised bump. And I can see it a little bit better now when we do our guide marks. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 segments. So I'm putting that right over the center. I like to do all the verticals first. So stencils come in different segments. So this is a 16 segment, and that's just like one of these right here is a segment. 1, 2, 3, there's 16 all the way around. But there are 12 segment stencils. There's all different types of segments, but I typically use a 16 or a 12 segment. This one's just a different type of material that's more flexible, so it's easier for rocks or curved surfaces, but they also sell these on Amazon. I have both linked in my Amazon shop. Okay, and then I'm going to do the circular ones. If you are a beginner, I definitely recommend using a stencil. This will really help keep everything nice and in line, symmetrical. I'm just gonna do those. I don't need to do the outside one. So now we have our segments. And for our color palette, I'm using leftover paint from a class I taught on Patreon. This is the piece that we painted on there. So if you are interested in learning larger, a little bit more advanced patterns, definitely check out my Patreon. Excuse me, my throat is so dry today. So I'm just gonna use some of the leftover paint. So this palette is actually really simple, and since this is such a small stone, I don't know that we will use all of these colors, but this palette is just watermelon slice from DecoArt, and then I added a little bit of white, and then more white, and then more white to get a gradient. So I probably won't use this one. Let me think here. Or maybe I'll just cut out the white. That's a lot of colors for such a small stone, but yeah, we'll just try it and see how it goes. But yeah, just watermelon slice and add a little bit more white, a little bit more to get a gradient. And then this one right here is white pearl with a little bit of watermelon slice. So I'm gonna start with the number 5 metallic color. And what size do we want for the center? I'm going to do the 10.5 dotting rod. I love this color palette. So we are doing a birth month flower series on my Patreon, where every month we're going to paint a 10-inch piece in the colors of the birth flower for that month. And January this month is marigold and snowdrop. So that is how I came up with this palette, except we painted on a red background instead of black for that one. So I like to do this little tapping motion just to make sure that it's nice and round and we're unloading paint. And then I'm going over a second time where I just hover over top. I'm not touching the rock completely, just to unload more paint so that it isn't transparent. And then I like to just take a tool, I'll take this size 2, and just swirl it out a little bit. This is really pretty with the metallics because it just makes it look nice and swirly. And then we will do a few rings of dots. I am still tempted to use white. Let's do white. I feel like it will pop. So I'm using the size 1 and white. That is really teeny tiny, but I think it's good for the small rock. I'm not used to painting on these small surfaces. You guys have probably seen my reels or my YouTube shorts. I personally like to paint large pieces, but my 2025 goal is to offer more free classes for beginners. So that is what I will be using my YouTube channel for, is to teach just smaller beginner classes like these rocks. And then when people get their basic beginner skills down, then they can move on to some of my more advanced classes. So as we're going, I'm noticing my dots are getting bigger, and it's because the paint is building up on my tool. So I'm going to wipe that off. Just to make sure they stay the same size. So I don't count these dots, I'm just doing them as close to one another as possible, and then as close to that center dot as possible without touching, so that the paint doesn't run together. So I can fit about 2 more dots here. Sometimes if they don't line up at the end, I just take a Q-tip and wipe it up and try to redo it with a little bit better spacing. I'm gonna wipe my tool off, and then I'll probably use the same tool. Let's go to the number, actually let's do the number 3 color. So instead of going up in size to a larger tool, I'm just using the same one, but I'm gonna load a little bit more paint so that my dots are a little bit bigger, and we're dotting in between each dot from the previous row. So if you don't load more paint for the second row, sometimes the dots will start to have big gaps in between. So as you do more rows, we're dotting in between each dot from the previous row. As you keep going and doing more rows, you want to either go up in size on your tools. So this is the size 1. You either want to go up to the 1.5 or use the same tool but load more paint on it so that they are a little bit bigger. So if you're doing your rows and you're noticing you have big gaps in between your dots, then go up in size on your tool or load more paint. My dots got a little bit off going in between, but it's okay. I just went with it. All right, now I need to decide if I want to do another ring or if I want to go into the next pattern. So let me just pick my tool real quick. And then let's do another ring. I'm gonna go to the number 2 color, and I was going in between and got a little bit off over here. So if I do in between again, it'll probably be off again. So I'm just gonna go for a larger ring. So these ones are smaller. So the next one, I'm not gonna go in between each dot. I'm just gonna start a new ring, and I'm using the size 2 stylus. And I'm just gonna start a new ring of larger dots, not going in between each dot from the previous row. And we use these circular guide marks, these ones going around, to make sure everything is symmetrical. So as I'm doing these rings of dots, I'm paying attention to where they are landing in reference to that first circular guide mark. These ones are right up against it. These ones over here, there's a little bit more space, but not too much. So as you're doing your patterns, always keep an eye on where your dots are landing in reference to your circular guide marks, because you want them all to be hitting at the same place. So I can't quite fit 3 dots here, but maybe 2, but space them a little bit farther apart and make them a little bit bigger. So that's what I do sometimes if I have like a weird spacing. I'll fit like those ones. I just made them a little bit spaced farther apart and a little bit bigger, but overall you can't really tell. It's just kind of like an optical illusion. Okay, now we are going to go into our next pattern. But we need a small... So maybe we will actually skip, if we do size 5, we can skip every other guide mark. So let's do the color 1, the most vibrant one, and the 5.5 rod. And I'm dotting on every other vertical guide mark. have a little bit of the paint splash right there. I'm just gonna take a Q-tip and wipe it up so it doesn't smudge and become a bigger mess. Okay, so now we have our dots. I'm going to take the 1.5 stylus and the white, and I'm going to make a dot right on that vertical guide mark and then walk the dots down so they will get progressively smaller. And we don't want these to be too big, so make sure you're not getting a ton of paint. Also, sometimes if you have too much paint on your tool, it won't go into a nice taper. We want to make sure we're leaving a gap here because we're going to be doing one more pattern around this. We recently moved into a new house in a very small town, but there actually seems to be more noise here than there was when we lived in our condo in the city, which is funny. There's just a lot of big trucks here and they make loud noise as they drive by. Like big construction type trucks and like semis and also motorcycles. So if you guys hear loud noises, that's what it is. Cute. I love this color palette. Okay. Now I'm gonna go to this number 4 color and I want to do, so I typically would use a brush for these, but I know not all beginners use brushes yet, so maybe we'll try both and then you can decide what you like best. So I'm going to try this 1.5 stylus first. I'm loading a good amount of paint. Actually, that might be too much paint because we don't have a lot of space here. And we're making a little petal. So I actually find this harder to do with the stylus. I'm going to try a brush. I'm going to use, actually my new set isn't open yet, my Thoughtful Dots brushes. I'm going to use the smallest one, which is the 3/0. I'm also in the process of making a new set of brushes that has shorter bristles. So you can either use a stylus or a brush, whatever you find easier. And I'm just going to get a little bit of paint. And brush on, we're just making flower petals. And then just make sure your petals are all ending at the same place. So mine are just going barely over our circular guide mark. My hands are pretty shaky today, so. I just find that the brushes are smoother than the stylus, but I also have a lot more practice with brushes than I do stylus, but I wanted to show you at least how you can do both. So now we have a cute little flower. And let's see here. Just kind of planning ahead in my head. I'm going to take the number 2 color and this 1.5 stylus. And I'm going to start a little swoosh. I'm gonna make a dot and then I'm gonna flip the tool over. And use the small end to drag down. So these are starting maybe a little bit higher than where our petals ended. And I like to use my pinky finger to rest on the rock to give me stability. So I'm dotting with the 1.5 end, making a dot and then flipping it over and using the size 1 end to drag down. Okay, now I'm going to take, let's actually do the white. And I'm taking the 1.5 stylus and I'm going to make a dot right at the top on that vertical guide mark. And then I'm wiping my tool off. And I'm using the same 1.5 and we're going to dot and drag down. So just dotting and then using little small motions to drag down. So you just have to find out if it's easier for you to hold your rock or to have it sitting down. And just be careful when you turn it so that you're not swiping any wet paint. So I just like to use those little draggy motions to just drag the paint down. Now I'm going to take a larger tool. Let's do the 2.5. And what color? Let's do, yeah, let's do the number 3 color. And I'm going to make 3 large dots at the tip of our petal that we're making. And this might actually be easier at this point for me to use my Lazy Susan. So I'm gonna grab my little Lazy Susan. It'll help me turn it a little bit more because right now manually turning it with my hand makes me nervous because I might swipe the wet paint. So sometimes a Lazy Susan helps turn. And I just got this one on Amazon. This is also in my Amazon shop. So I'm just dotting on the left side of that vertical guide mark and then the right side and then in the center. So left, right, center. Okay, and then I'm gonna go down in size. Let's try the size 2 stylus, same color. And we are going to make a dot and then drag along the previous swoosh that we made. So dot and drag. Dot and drag. So this is a bigger stylus, so it grabs more paint. So I'm not needing as many of those like little draggy motions. It's kind of just like one, so that it tapers. And if your taper isn't coming to a nice point, wipe off your tool. All right, and then I'm going to use the number 5 color, the one that's in the center, the pearlish pink color. And I'm gonna try the same size tool and see if it works. Now I'm going to make a swoosh that's a little bit short. So I guess it's pretty much the same length, maybe a little bit shorter than the swoosh we did right before. So just dot and drag into this little gap. And if your paint is just all close to each other and running together, then I recommend waiting for your previous swoosh to dry a bit before going in to do the next one. Okay, and that large dot right there, I think is probably pretty dry. I want a top dot on it, so we used this color. I want a top dot with a lighter color, so I'm gonna use the number 3 and a 3.5 dotting rod. And then you might not push all the way down because you don't want to completely cover that large dot. We just want to top dot it. And when top dotting, you always want to make sure the previous dot is dry, or these will be a little bit misshapen sometimes. And then I will let that dry, and then I'll top dot again, probably with white. Wiping that tool off. And then I'm going to do some swooshes using Nuvo drops. So this is a 3-dimensional paint. This is simply white. If you do not have Nuvo drops, you can just use the regular white and you will do a swoosh kind of like we did there with your stylus, where you just dot and drag down and then 2 more on the sides. But I really like the Nuvo. So I dot, and then I'm going to use my micro dotting tool, which is the smallest one in the set, the 0.5. I'm gonna clean mine off because it has a little dried paint. So I make a dot and then I use my micro dotting tool to drag the paint. And then I'm going to do 2 shorter ones on each side. And just slowly drag the paint down into a swoosh. I will show you this very carefully. So we will do that in the gap all the way around. Again, if you don't have Nuvo, use maybe the 2.5 to make a dot, and then you can use your micro dotting tool to drag down. Just going nice and slow, especially because my hand is so shaky today. Too much coffee. I honestly find it easier to paint larger pieces. I feel like the small ones are a little tricky. If you're a beginner who doesn't use brushes yet, I recommend giving it a try, because I know it seems intimidating, but once you get the brushes down, it's actually way easier than doing it this way. For me, at least. I will link my brushstroke course in the description if you're interested. That was a little wonky, but it's okay. Super cute. Okay. Do I want to add anything else? Let's see. I'm gonna let this dry for a minute and then we can finish off with our little top dot. I might actually top dot this swoosh, just a little tiny dot. The Lazy Susan makes it so much easier. Okay, so I'm just gonna let this dry for a minute and then we can finish off with some final details. Okay, so I let this dry for a minute and I was just gonna do one more top dot, but I kind of want to do two just to give it extra detail. So what color did we do? Number 3? So let's do the number 4 color. And instead of using a dotting rod, I'm going to use a stylus. I'm going to use the size 3. And we're just dotting right on top. So the fun thing about top dots is you can just keep layering them. But I think we'll just do this one and then end with a teeny tiny white dot. So this is cute as is. I feel like I'm always just keep adding and adding and adding. I kind of want to add like 3 little dots in here just to fill in that gap. Let me think about what color. Maybe the number 1 color, just because we don't have a lot of that color in here. And then I kind of just want to add a little something on the side here. It's going to be really hard for you to see, but maybe I can just show you at the end. I'm going to use the number 5 color. And what do I want to do? I think I'll just use the 1.5, so a small stylus, and just start. I just want some little walking the dots. Just to kind of finish this edge off. I can't really show you. I gotta be super careful. Can you see that? So we're just starting and then walking the dots until they end at this pattern here. Just adds a nice little finishing detail. While I was waiting for that last bit to dry, I went downstairs and made myself a slice of homemade sourdough. I love making sourdough. I'm actually making another loaf right now. But my husband and I were in the kitchen and he found a carton of milk up in the cabinet where the glasses are. And neither of us, obviously, neither of us remember doing that, so we couldn't figure out why there was a carton of milk in the cabinet. So weird. I told him we must have a friendly ghost. That's cute. Could add one more little swoosh here. I could keep going and going and adding more and more detail. Let's do the number 4. I just want a teeny tiny little swoosh, and you can totally skip this part. I just wanted to see what it looks like. I think it's cute. I feel like that just kind of fills in the gaps and ties everything together. And then I'm going to use the 1.5 and the white. And I'm going to do our last little top dot. I said I had too much coffee and my hands are shaking, but then I went down and made another cup. I only had 1 cup of coffee before this, but my hands just get so shaky. And then if you want to add one more little detail, I'm going to take my micro dotting tool. I love this micro dotting tool. So that's the 0.5. And I'm gonna make a dot and then a dot. So right in between, in those little gaps on that last row. So this micro dotting tool is really great for getting those teeny tiny details. Those first few are a little small, so I'm gonna go over them again. Should we keep going? I can add a little more. I kind of want to add like a little swoosh. Let me try it. Let me try it first and see. Obviously, you guys don't have to do all these little details. You can end whenever you'd like, but I like just taking things a little step further. I like that, but I actually want it to be in metallic. So I'm just taking a little Q-tip and wiping that up. So I'm gonna do, I call them top swooshes, which is what I just did. But instead of the white, I wanna use the metallic color. And I'm just going right over the top at the base. I'm not necessarily going all the way to the tip. But this just kind of gives it a highlight. I don't know, the white would have looked good too, but this works. And then I think we're done. So you guys could take this same pattern and do it in a bunch of different colors, different color palettes. Switch it up. Oh, this would be a cute Valentine stone. And instead of the 3 little dots here, you could make it a little heart. Cute. Okay, that is all. Adorable. So I'm going to let this dry. I don't think I'll show the varnishing part, but I'll show you what I like to use. So for little rocks, I like to use DecoArt Triple Thick. Just know that when you use this, it goes on really thick. Make sure your paint is completely dry, and it can be a little hazy. So just know that it dries clear, and just don't go too thick, and also don't work it too much because you can get brush strokes on this. If you want something a little easier to work with, I really like the Liquitex varnishes. These are both brush-ons. This one's thinner, so it's not as thick as this one. It's also satin, so it's not as glossy. So just depends what kind of finish you want. This one's a little bit harder to work with, but gives you a really glossy finish, almost like resin. And this one's a thinner, easier to work with, but not as glossy. So I'll just brush on 1 or 2 coats of these to finish. And once it's dry, you can use a wet wipe or something to wipe off your guide marks. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that tutorial, and keep an eye out for more beginner tutorials here on YouTube to come. All right, we'll see you next time.